In the archives of a Dutch company specializing in investing, there is an intriguing record preserved in the ship's log of Admiral Jacob Ravine, dated April 5th of the year 0 AD. On that memorable day, coinciding with Easter, his three ships confidently advancing through the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean suddenly encountered a small, nearly invisible patch of land. This tiny isolated island turned out to be non-existent on any map available at that time. The admiral named it Pass, or later known as Easter Island. However, what he and his exhausted crew, having endured a long and exhausting voyage, saw on the island's shore completely contradicted all logical assumptions and the experience of sailors. The island presented an almost lifeless volcanic landscape, covered with scorched grass and sparse low shrubs. No tall trees were visible that could serve as material for masts or planks for boats, not even sturdy logs for construction. Its inhabitants, several thousand people who came ashore to observe the visitors, appeared exhausted, worn out from the long journey. Their bodies were covered with tattoos, and the only vessels they had at their disposal were fragile canoes, small boats sewn from thin planks, incapable of withstanding even a short trip to the nearest inhabited island, located thousands of kilometers away. Yet despite these harsh conditions, astonishing statues were placed all over this nearly abandoned landscape. Massive stone sculptures, some reaching the height of a four-story building, weighing tens of tons, with enormous stone hats, heavy multi-ton stone headdresses. These statues stood on massive stone platforms, gazing toward the island as if watching over it. Their elongated faces, with deeply set eye sockets, kept silent for centuries. All this scene was a combination of mystery and wonder. Before proceeding to the main part of the story, I would like to ask for a moment of your attention. Your support is the most valuable contribution. Thank you for your attention. Jacob Ravine was stunned by what he saw. In his journal, he recorded with bewilderment, "We cannot understand how these people, lacking sturdy ropes, building timber, or any machines, managed to erect such sculptures, reaching 30 feet in height." This question, posed by the Dutch sailor 300 years ago, became the starting point of one of the most mysterious and persistent enigmas in human history. We long believed we had found the answer. We developed a convenient, simple, and instructive theory about societal life, which, blinded by inter-clan conflicts and religious fervor, ultimately led to self-destruction. This story tells of how the islanders cut down the last forest to build and transport their final statue, after which their civilization collapsed into famine and cannibalism. It is a beautiful, tragic parable that so naturally fits into the fabric of our modern fears. But what if all of this is a lie? What if the true story of Easter Island is much more complex, technological, and horrifying than it appears at first glance? Recent scientific discoveries made using ground-penetrating radar, acoustic analysis, and genetic sequencing methods not only cast doubt on the old theory, they completely demolish it. From the ruins of this ancient legend, a new, chilling picture emerges. A picture where the statues are not merely monuments to ancestors, but are more like fortresses or castles built from shafts and tunnels, and the entire island is not just a tomb for a once-lost civilization. Before delving into the mysterious and dark depths of the underground, it is essential to fully grasp the scale of human ingenuity expressed on the surface. In the creation of these astonishing statues, the grandeur and precision with which the Moai were carved are themselves extraordinary phenomena, sharply challenging our usual notions of primitive ancient societies. Let us at least for a moment forget legends, conspiracy theories, and myths, and focus on a simple, undeniable fact: the cold stone. Almost all of the 877 known Moai were created from the same unique location. This place is the interior and exterior caldera of Rano Raraku volcano. It can be said that this is not just a mountain, but a true factory of the gods, a production line for idols that operated continuously for many centuries. The material used to create these statues is volcanic tuff, a dense, compacted rock formed from compressed ash. Geologically, it is considered relatively soft, which at the time made it possible to work with. However, the word relatively is very important here. This material remains stone nonetheless, requiring incredible effort, colossal effort, to shape it properly. Archaeologists have found thousands of basalt chisels at the foot of the volcano, called Toki. Basalt is a very hard and dense volcanic rock, and it was the only available tool capable of cutting the tuff. Imagine this process. A team of stonecutters suspended on ropes, working on the sheer walls of the quarry. They used only handheld stone tools, working for hours, days, and even years under the scorching sun. They slowly chipped away tiny particles of rock, millimeter by millimeter, freeing the figure hidden inside the stone. It was not just hard and monotonous work. Modern scientists, who conducted laser scanning in recent years from the USA and Chile, have shown that the surfaces of many Moai are finished with astonishing smoothness. Part 3 of 13. Features: a thin, elongated nose, tightly pressed lips, and elongated ears. All possess almost perfect symmetry. This not only attests to the skill of each stonemason, but also indicates the existence of standard methods, possibly even wooden templates and complex measurement systems. Entire generations pass down this knowledge, refining it from one generation to the next. In Rano Raraku Quarry, there are still about 397 unfinished statues, as if the work was suddenly halted in the middle of a shift. They are at various stages of completion. Some are merely faint outlines in the rock, ghosts of future statues that never saw the light of day. Others are fully carved, polished, and ready for transport, but remain attached to the host rock by a thin strip along the back. The largest among them, known as El Gigante, measures 21 meters and 6 centimeters in length, with an estimated weight of around 270 tons. It lies there like a sleeping leviathan, a symbol of ambitions seemingly without earthly limits. But carving the statue is only the first part of a complex task. The real mystery is, how was this 900-ton monolith moved? For example, the famous Moai Paro, over a distance of up to 18 kilometers across rugged, hilly terrain. And all this without the use of draft animals and, as long believed, without trees for making sleds or rollers. However, the story does not end there. Archaeological findings mention that about 100 statues had a special covering placed on their heads, the so-called puako. These enormous cylindrical structures, made from red volcanic rock known as pumsa, weighed up to 12 tons each. They were quarried from another site, in an area where this unique stone was extracted, and somehow, using complex methods, lifted and installed onto the heads of existing idols. This task was no less challenging than creating the statues themselves. Initially, various hypotheses and theories existed, many based on guesses and imagination rather than concrete facts. Most of these versions reflected more of our own fantasies and assumptions than the actual technical capabilities of the ancient builders of Rapa Nui. In 1955, the renowned Norwegian researcher Thor Heyerdahl decided to conduct an experiment to test how feasible it was to move a 12-ton statue. He invited 80 people, and together they struggled to drag such a heavy figure, placed on wooden sleds, over a relatively short distance. This was an important piece of evidence. However, to move statues weighing 80 tons, thousands of people would have been required. And on the island, it was long believed that there were no longer enough trees to supply the necessary amount of wood for such purposes. In 1986, Czech engineer Pavel proposed a completely new theory. He suggested that the statues were not being dragged, but were moving on their own. According to his calculations, the convex base and the shifted center of gravity, which had previously been considered mistakes, were actually a brilliant solution. He proposed using ropes wrapped around the statue's head to sway it from side to side, and with this method, step by step, to move it forward, similar to how we move a heavy refrigerator. His experiments with a model made of 20-ton concrete demonstrated that this method was indeed feasible. However, the scientific community remained skeptical, and only in 2011 did a team of American archaeologists, consisting of Carl Lipo and Terry Hunt, manage to prove the opposite. They created an exact replica of Moai, weighing 5 tons, and demonstrated in practice that this method was not only possible, but also highly effective. In a short period, just a few hours, a team of only 18 people was able to move the statue over a distance of several hundred meters. This discovery fully confirmed the oral traditions of the Rapa Nui people. which for a long time claimed that Moai were statues that walked and moved under the influence of the force of mana, an inner energy that fills all living and non-living things on the island. But at the same time, a new, even more complex question arose. If moving the statues did not require large-scale deforestation and destruction of nature, then where did all those trees go? Why did such a carefully thought-out, centuries-old coordinated process suddenly stop so abruptly with catastrophic consequences? The answers to these questions were not recorded in stone or written sources. They were inscribed in blood and ash, in combat clashes and bloody battles. To understand why the factory of gods, as the ancient craftsmen who created these statues were called, suddenly ceased, one must turn to the only surviving witnesses of that era, the oral traditions of the Rapa Nui people. For many years, science regarded these stories as simple folklore, naive myths created to explain mysterious events of the past. But recent archaeological discoveries and research compel us to reconsider these legends. Now we can perceive them not just as fairy tales, but as ancient chronicles reflecting real events. These are the only surviving testimonies of the brutal civil war that tore the island apart and forever changed its fate. In the oral tradition of the Rapa Nui people, legends and stories tell that it was these ancient beings, called the first builders of Moai, who initiated the great construction on the island. According to these ancient tales, they possessed a special connection to the mystical force of mana, an invisible but powerful energy that permeates the entire universe. According to legends, this energy could be concentrated and controlled through special rituals and sacred objects created for this purpose. These objects are believed to be the initiators of the construction of great stone structures, which remain symbols of power and mystery for centuries. The short-eared people, according to the same legend, appeared on the island much later. Their arrival is linked to their subjugation, as they became the workforce for the initial builders. These short-eared individuals, essentially slaves or members of a lower caste, performed heavy labor, erecting grand monuments and memorials. For many centuries, a strict hierarchical order existed. Supreme authority belonged to the ancestors, those who had a connection to the mana, and the lower classes, including the short-eared, served them. Over time, this social structure became firmly established, and adherence to it became the rule. However, as the years passed, tensions within society grew. Tired of constant labor and unjust oppression, the short-eared began to express discontent. Eventually, this discontent erupted into an open rebellion. According to legend, a large-scale war broke out, sweeping across the entire history of the island and leaving a deep imprint on the people's memory. It is described that this battle was so fierce and dramatic that even in literature and art, scenes from it were depicted to convey its horror. The last warriors of the long-eared, those who remained faithful to the old gods and cults, found themselves in the western part of the island. Their refuge was a peninsula called Poiki, a narrow defensible area in the eastern part of the island. There, along a long and deep defensive trench known as Ipo, the final battle unfolded. This was a decisive confrontation that determined the fate of the entire era. Before the attack, to prepare for defense, the short-eared filled the trench with firewood and dry grass. They knew that the enemies might attempt to attack them in the dark, and they did everything to hinder their task. When the long-eared launched their assault, the short-eared set the trench ablaze, transforming it into a wall of fire. The idea was to stop the enemy and destroy their forces. As a result, the fire engulfed everything around, turning the battlefield into a hellish blaze. According to tradition, at that moment, all remnants of wars and battles fought by the long-eared over a long period were consumed in the fiery flames. This terrible act of destruction became a symbol of the complete and irreversible annihilation of their people and culture. In the collective memory, that day remained a tragic chapter, an act of genocide forever etched in legends and mythic accounts. For many years, archaeologists believed that this story was merely a metaphor, an allegory for class struggle. But everything changed in the 1960s when excavations were conducted on Urva Ipa Island. These studies, carried out by scientists Thor Heyerdahl and William Moai, proved to be truly astonishing. They discovered a layer of thick charcoal which testified to a massive fire. Part 6 of 13. Human-like bones were discovered in this layer, charred, fragmented, and scattered in a chaotic pattern. Radiocarbon analysis indicated that the mass burning occurred around the year 1680 AD, which astonishingly coincided with the dates mentioned in the legends. Recent DNA studies conducted by scientists from the University of California revealed that time continued to pass, and the fate of the ancient inhabitants of the island changed forever. The short-eared winners, those who, in a fit of rage or under the influence of ritual fears, decided to destroy what their ancestors had created, began systematically destroying the sacred monuments. Their target was the Moai, majestic stone statues standing on ceremonial platforms called ahu. These destructions were not random or chaotic. On the contrary, they were carefully planned and systematic. The victors undermined the bases of the statues, placed stones under their feet to topple them face down, depriving them of the ability to look forward, toward the sky or their creators. They deliberately broke their necks, the most vulnerable part of the structure. During this brutal ritual, they shattered the eyes, which were inlaid with coral and obsidian. These eyes were considered not merely decorative, but according to belief, contained and radiated the very mana, the magical energy linking the statues to spiritual forces. Such acts were not simple vandalism. They represented something greater, a symbolic killing of stone gods, attributed with protection or, conversely, regarded as sources of danger. These gods seemed either unable to protect their creators or had themselves become threats emanating from the depths of their power. This pivotal moment in the island's history explains why early European sailors, such as Jakob Rogan and his followers, saw many toppled and dead statues. However, it does not provide a complete answer to the main question. What exactly frightened or angered the victors so much that they decided to destroy what their ancestors had built over centuries with such fury? The answer may be hidden, not on the surface but deeper, beneath the ground, inside the earth itself. The discovery that the Mayans possessed bodies buried beneath the surface shocked the global community in the early 20th century. But this was only the tip of the iceberg. It was merely a lure, distracting attention from the true abyss, much darker secrets hidden underground. In recent years, armed with the most advanced technologies that the previous generation of archaeologists could not even imagine, scientists have begun not just excavating the island, but penetrating its depths, scanning through stone, soil, and layers of time. And what they have found compels a reevaluation of all previous assumptions. In 2022-2024, an international team of specialists conducted ground-penetrating radar scans that revealed a complex and extensive network of natural lava tubes beneath the surface of the island, remnants of ancient volcanic processes. This was an expected discovery since the island had formed precisely as a result of volcanic activity. But the most astonishing and remarkable thing was something else. Many of these natural tunnels, especially those passing beneath the clusters of Maya statues, turned out not to be purely natural formations. Their walls had been expanded and reinforced with dry stone masonry, indicating deliberate human intervention. Side passages were created, leading into artificial chambers of regular geometric shape, forming an entire underground network. Some of these tunnels directly connected to the bases of the statues, creating a unified, branching underground space that no one had previously suspected existed. This was no coincidence. It was a grand engineering design, carefully planned and executed. The Maya did not simply place statues on the surface. They installed them at the entrances and key points of this underground system, like guards or sentinels protecting the entrances to a hidden subterranean world. Excavations of these chambers revealed even more shocking findings. Inside, there were no traditional or honorific ancestral burials. Instead, traces of intense and brutal ritual activity were found. There were circles of obsidian figurines, remnants of burned wooden structures, and most importantly, human bones. But these bones did not form neatly arranged skeletons. They were not just graves or tombs as we usually see. These sites more closely resembled shrines or sacrificial sites intended for ritual acts or executions. Chemical analysis of the soil in these chambers uncovered extraordinarily high concentrations of substances, phosphates, calcium, and heavy metals. These elements indicated that intense decomposition of large amounts of organic matter had taken place there. It was conceivable that what occurred here was not merely burial rites, but something far more complex and mysterious, linked to ancient rituals. Under one of the statues, known among archaeologists as Ahutera, a human jawbone was found. It was literally embedded in solidified volcanic rock, as if it were part of the stone monument itself. Geological analysis showed that the surrounding stone had been subjected to extreme temperatures, over 1,000 degrees Celsius, and this had happened after the jawbone was placed there. This meant that the stone had been heated and cooled repeatedly, and the heating process was very intense and deliberate. Such an effect could not have resulted from a random fire or natural geological activity. It was a conscious act aimed at permanently embedding human remains in stone. One could say that this created a kind of eternity, like these remains had been preserved in amber, maintaining their form forever. But perhaps the most astonishing and inexplicable discovery was made not with the eyes but with the ears. During the mapping of one of the deep passages beneath the group of statues on the western ridge of the island, where the rocky terrain proved to be particularly dense and difficult to traverse, scientists recorded something strange using sensitive seismographs and acoustic sensors. They detected a constant low-frequency hum, which was at the edge of human hearing, in the range of 8 to 12 hertz. This hum gradually intensified as they delved deeper into the underground layers. And most astonishingly, it was not mechanical. It did not resemble the noise of moving machinery or seismic waves from the Earth. It did not correspond to any known natural or geological phenomenon. Acoustic engineers brought in to investigate described it as an infrasound but structured sound with quasi-periodic pulsations. It was impossible to hear in the usual sense, but it was definitely perceptible. This low-frequency hum vibrated in the chest and bones, creating a sense of inexplicable anxiety, disorientation, and internal discomfort among some expedition members. One researcher, more sensitive to these vibrations, described it as the presence of a giant sleeping engine, or, even more strangely, something alive, breathing right beneath their feet. These sounds seemed to carry some hidden power, giving people the sensation that something important was happening inside the Earth, something that could not be fully understood. Additionally, the acoustic properties of the chambers and tunnels themselves were remarkable. Inside them, almost no echo was present, as if the walls absorbed any sound, as if they were porous rocks capable of dampening any noise. Footsteps or sounds of moving objects did not bounce off the walls, but were swallowed by the oppressive silence, which felt almost tangible. The only sound breaking this darkness was that very inexplicable hum, which permeated everywhere and seemed to be part of this place. Turning to ancient legends, we suddenly begin to see them, not just as stories, but as hidden messages. In some secret traditions of the Rapa Nui people, passed down whisperingly from priest to student, it is said that the statues, called Moai, were not placed to look at the sea or at the villages of their descendants. Their purpose was to observe something hidden inside the island, something lying at its very heart. Legends mention Tepi Pitoteko. The Moai were never simply regarded as monuments to gods or revered ancestors. These monuments were not just symbols of status, signs of unity, or manifestations of tradition. On the contrary, a modern and increasingly compelling hypothesis offers a completely different view of their purpose. According to this new theory, the truth may be far darker and more functional than commonly believed. It suggests that the Moai were not spiritual markers or merely elements of tribal art. They acted as seals or plugs, part of a vast containment system designed to control something very important. At the time, this hypothesis, which once seemed merely a part of the ideological experiments of marginal scientists, is now gaining increasing recognition among specialists from various fields: geologists, physicists, and even some archaeologists. These researchers suggest that the Rapa Nui people built these sculptures not to honor their deceased ancestors or deities, but to contain within something alive and dangerous, or at least what they believe possessed the power, energy, and will to influence the living, not in the sky, not beyond the sea, but right beneath their feet. And although such ideas sound like the plot of science fiction, everything becomes clearer when looking at the data map recently obtained. In 2024, using modern technologies, ground-penetrating radar and deep-sea sonar, Scientists discovered a network of lava tubes and unnatural chambers located directly beneath the main platforms of the Moai. These formations were not accidental. Many of them were reinforced, carved, or marked with glyphs that did not correspond to known Rongorongo symbols. One particular central cave drew special attention. It was situated beneath the line of toppled statues near Anakina Beach. This cave apparently concealed a central shaft lined with basalt slabs. Each slab was engraved with strange spiral and concentric symbols. The shaft extended deep underground beyond the reach of radar and remains unexplored to this day. Some geologists and engineers analyzing this structure hypothesize that such shafts might not have been used for storage, but conversely for release, perhaps of geothermal steam or gas that would relieve internal pressure. But what if everything was the opposite? What if these structures were not meant to contain energy or dangerous substances, but rather to trap something ancient inside, something very dangerous and unpredictable? If this hypothesis is correct, one might suppose that the Moai were strategically placed as plugs in a giant vessel. They served as stone guardians installed in places where the boundary between surface and depth was particularly weak or significant. In this context, the strange magnetic anomalies, infrasound hum, and localized micro-earthquakes recorded precisely in these areas begin to make sense. All of this gains particular meaning when viewed through the lens of the idea that the statues were not mere idols. They were part of a technological, or rather, a sacred technological containment system. When the Rapa Nui people realized that the system was failing, the hum grew louder and the ground beneath their feet trembled more and more. They became frightened. In response, they turned to one of the most powerful means known to humans: sacrifices. They sacrificed blood and fire in hopes of strengthening the weakening seals. But that did not help either. Then they completely abandoned the system, bearing it in silence, hoping that no one would dare dig too deep. The consequences of this hypothesis radically change the perception of Easter Island's history. It transforms the familiar story into something more primal, more mysterious. Instead of a moral tale about ecological recklessness, we are presented with a complex picture of a struggle against ancient forces. The story of survival on this enigmatic island is a tale of the last desperate battle to preserve its heritage and its world. This island was not a place of peace or idle, as some might think. It was more like a battlefield of fierce clashes, where each stone statue and monument was part of a complex defense system, a kind of front line in the fight for survival. These stone figures, Moai, are not merely decorations. They symbolize the strength, faith, and hope of the people who created them. But today, these statues stand as witnesses to a struggle that ended tragically. One of the researchers involved in the latest expedition chose to remain anonymous, and his words sounded very precise and touching. He said that the deeper they dug, the more they studied underground layers and hidden structures, the clearer it became that the threat coming from beneath the island was not only symbolic, it was very real and literally overwhelming. His words carried a warning. Something in the geological structure of this place was amiss. All signs pointed to unusual phenomena: thermal signatures, vibrational oscillations, and even pressure impulses that could not be explained by ordinary geological processes. All of this indicated ongoing activity beneath the ground, activity that was unnatural in its nature. This activity could be linked to some anomalous geophysical or other force still raging inside the island. The most frightening discovery from the archaeological excavations was that some of the statues, which once stood proudly and unshakably, suddenly collapsed. These figures were created with such precision and strength that they were designed to stand for centuries. They were not meant to topple, but now many lay broken and shattered on the ground. Their necks were especially vulnerable. They broke under the weight of the fall, and the structure of these stone giants was compromised. When such statues, part of a system intended for containment or protection, fail, a question arises. What will happen if there are too many of them, if they all begin to break? What will occur when we, humans, with our curiosity and technology, disturb what was created to hold and defend? The silence of this island, its quiet, may not be peaceful calm, but a tense stillness hiding something dangerous. Perhaps it is holding its breath, waiting for someone to dare disturb its peace. For centuries, the Maya raised these giant statues from volcanic stone. They carved them from dense rock, dragged or brought them across the entire island to place them on massive stone platforms. Some of these platforms were so large that their weight exceeded 80 tons. The creation of such monuments was not accidental. It was a manifestation of a national obsession, a sacred duty that united the entire people and their culture. These statues symbolize strength, spiritual connection, and unity among the people. They served as the center of religious and cultural rituals, part of a sacred order. But suddenly, everything stopped. All that had been a lifetime's work disappeared in an instant. There was no gradual decline or slow disappearance. Simply silence fell, lasting for centuries. Archaeologists were well aware of the unfinished statues remaining in the Rano Raraku quarry. Some of them lay partially carved in stone, as if workers had suddenly stopped, leaving their work incomplete. Others were fully formed, but never transported to their intended sites. Nearby these statues, tools were found: chisels, stone hammers, and fiber ropes, all abandoned, as if the workers had left at the last moment, leaving their tasks unfinished. These findings suggested a sudden halt to the work, hinting that something disrupted the usual course of events. For many years, it was believed that some of the most astonishing and chilling evidence comes precisely from the petroglyphs created in later periods of this mysterious island's history. These images were hastily engraved on cave walls scattered across the island, as if a final attempt to record something important and inevitable. Unlike earlier petroglyphs, which were characterized by their clarity, austerity, and often held symbolic or ceremonial meanings, modern images appear wild, chaotic, and sometimes frightening. They depict wide-eyed figures with open mouths, creating a sense of horror and despair. Among the drawings are spirals and concentric circles emanating from central voids, as if symbols of energy or some forces emerging from the depths. Human figures with missing limbs, surrounded by jagged lines, interpreted by some researchers as flames or waves of energy, seem to reflect internal chaos or spiritual upheaval. In one of the recently discovered caves, found in the 21st century, there is a unique image, a wall carving depicting the Maya splitting in half. From this split, an amorphous, indescribable creature appears to rise, creating the impression that reality at that moment is blurred, dissolving into mist. For the Rapa Nui people living on the island, very serious changes occurred. The Moai, which once served as protection, a connection to ancestors and channels of divine mana, suddenly lost their power. Something changed in their energy. The statues, once revered and carefully protected, now evoked fear and anxiety. The question arose, was this the result of a spiritual crisis, a psychological breakdown of the entire people, or were more material factors to blame? Ecological disasters or geological anomalies that sharply altered the island's appearance and its energy balance. It was clear that people began to see in Moai something different, not protectors, but a threat that could harm or even destroy them. This fear left deep and painful scars on the island. In some areas, toppled statues lay face down, as if deliberately overturned, as a sign of protest or a symbol of final rupture. These acts were not acts of enemies or manifestations of destruction by colonizers. All this happened long before contact with Europeans. Oral traditions say that some Moai, previously considered sacred, suddenly became angry, hostile, and dangerous. Their mana, the energy connecting them to the divine, seemed to have been corrupted, making them hazardous to those around them. Au, Au, these were the names elders used for these statues, warning to stay away. One legend tells of a statue that could speak to the wind, and anyone sleeping near it could fall ill. Such stories, once dismissed as superstitions, now seem more real. They reflect the psychological terror that gripped the island in recent years, when new monuments and structures began to be erected. And suddenly, as if by magic, everything stopped. No one dared to disturb the Moai anymore. The culture associated with ancestor worship and the veneration of the statues disintegrated. It was replaced by the cult of the birdman, Tangata Manu. This was a brutal and bloody contest in which members of different clans risked their lives to obtain the first egg of the black noddy, laid on neighboring rocky islets. The winner became the spiritual leader for a year, and the rituals moved from ceremonial platforms into caves and onto the cliffs of Aronga. Moai statues were left to the mercy of the elements. Those once considered sacred were now abandoned and left unprotected. Their eyes, originally made of coral and decorated with painted pupils, were either removed or damaged. What could have driven people to abandon the statues themselves, which, according to their beliefs, served as protection against the forces of darkness? Why did fear so completely take hold of them that they stopped even building new monuments, despite the vital role these sculptures, in their view, played? After all, these statues were supposed to contain evil and keep darkness at bay. But suddenly, at some point, construction ceased, and the reasons for this remain unclear. And if you think more deeply, the question arises, how can one claim that history has no secrets or mysteries still waiting for their moment? Are we, humans, with our arrogance and overconfidence, at risk of someday facing a situation where we find ourselves trapped in a place we mistakenly believe to be sacred or a temple? Perhaps there is something in our lives that we mistakenly consider safe and holy, when in fact it is just an illusion masking danger. Where is the line between truth and fiction? What is real and what is merely a product of our imagination? These questions remain highly relevant. I want to express my sincere gratitude to everyone who watched this episode until the end. Your support, attention, and feedback are very important to us. Don't forget to pay attention to the important details and stay informed about the latest events, because only then can you understand the true meaning of what is happening. In the future, we will have new interesting topics and stories, and we will do our best to share them with you.